Kris, Alexander County Veteran Service Officer, and today I'm with Kris Knowlton. Kris, would you please tell me a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born?
Well, I was born January the 12th, 1955 in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. What community do you live in now?
I live in the Bethlehem community. Actually, I'm right on the Wittenberg-Bethlehem line, kind of behind the Bethlehem Convenience Center.
Okay. What did you do prior to joining the military? Actually,
I was working for a company that was called Concept 70 Incorporated, and what I did was I built fiberglass wings for sailplanes. Pretty good job.
Okay. How did you feel about the military? Was there a war going on when you joined, or?
I joined 10 months after Vietnam was over with.
Okay.
And I always knew that someday I'd join the military. I mean, it was just kind of in my blood. My family has a real long history dating back to the Revolutionary War of being in the military. The family name goes all the way back. George Washington was friends with one of my great whatever uncles, or and so I kind of knew that all my life that someday I would join the military.
Okay, and so you actually volunteered to join?
Yes. Oh yes.
Okay, and what was your branch of service?
I was in the Army.
Okay.
I might add though, I was in the last lottery for Vietnam, and my number was 41. So either way, I was going in somewhere.
Better to volunteer.
Better to volunteer. Of course, they didn't pick any from my lottery number. I was pretty safe, but at the time I was joining, things were starting to get heated up in the Mideast. Kind of like today. You know, fast forward 34 years, you know, or 40 years now, I guess it is. So anyway, that's kind of how I got into the military.
Okay. Which unit or division were you with?
When I got out AIT, I was with the 5th Transportation Battalion at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which was an air mobile battalion. We had a lot of help. We had 120 aircraft attached to our battalion. Well, actually 240 aircraft attached to our battalion. And I was in charge of repairing the transponders that are on the aircraft, on about 120 of them.
Okay. What was the highest rank you achieved?
I was a Spec 5.
And how long did you serve?
I served 4 years.
Okay. Were you overseas, stateside, or both?
I was both. Back in July, in fact, I think tomorrow will be 30, to go back 34, 5, 6, I think it was 36 years ago tomorrow that I went to Korea.
Oh, okay. What did you envision the military would be like after you joined?
Well, when I first went in, I thought I would stay in for 20 years. Gerald Ford was president at that time, and then things kind of changed a little bit after the change of administration. There were some things in the military that I didn't care for anymore. My big plan was when I got in, I was going to go to Warrant Officer Flight School. I passed all the tests, and I'd flown prior to going into the service, so that was one of the things that I really wanted to do. And when I was at Fort Campbell, I talked to a warrant officer that had just gotten out of flight school, and he told me, he said, "Buddy, don't do it. Don't do it." He said, "We're not getting enough flight time to even get, just about not enough flight time to get flight pay." And he says, "And they treat us like privates."
Oh.
He said, "It is not a good place to get right now." So I didn't pursue that avenue, and thought, well, I'll do my 4 years and then I'll get out.
Okay. Where was your basic training?
Good old Fort Jackson, South Carolina on Tank Hill.
Do you remember anything about the basic training? Were you nervous, excited, or scared?
I never was scared, never was nervous about it, because I knew that first of all they were going to break you down.
Right.
I knew that they were going to do that, and then they were going to build you up into the way that they want you built up. And you know, once you understand that, the physical part, that's all you got to get through is the physical part, because the mental part is a breeze. The lack of sleep, oh, there was a lack of sleep. I mean, you were guaranteed 4 hours of sleep a night. You got that every other night. The other nights was you had to pull some kind of duty for 1 hour, which meant you got about 2.5 hours of sleep that night. And even the night you got to sleep for 4 hours, you didn't really get to sleep good, because you're always thinking about them coming in and banging the trash can lids to wake you up. So, you know, I got to admit, basic training physically was pretty tough, but, you know, I figured 1 million other guys went through it. I could go through it too.
That's right. Do you remember any of your instructors? And if you do, what stands out about them?
Drill Sergeant Wilder. He had served in Vietnam. He was a little black guy, he was almost as tall as me, and he was very good at being a drill sergeant. He was very fair. I don't think he ever mistreated anybody, and he was a good guy. I would have stayed beside him in battle and covered his rear end.
Did you make any friends while you were in the military, and do you still keep in touch with them?
Lord, yes. Lord, yes. I have friends in Texas. I have friends in Kentucky. I have friends in Korea, and I still do keep in touch with them. After 25 years, I got one in Missouri too. And after about being out of the service for 25 years, I got on the internet because I really wanted to find this one guy. He was from Long Island, New York, and I found him. Now you figure how many millions of people in New York, and you look them up on the internet, and there's 2 that have the same name. Only 2. Well, I remembered he was from Long Island, and there was only one of them from Long Island, and I called him up. And he says, "Kris, is that you? Is that you?" I said, "No, I just called some random number and claimed that my name is Kris." He could not believe it after 25 years that I hadn't heard from him since AIT. And got a hold of him again. He was a very dear friend when we were in AIT, but you know, back in those days, long distance calls were expensive.
Right.
So you didn't make long distance calls very often, and once you went to your permanent duty station to begin with, you kind of lose touch with each other, because he doesn't know your phone number, you don't know his phone number, you're just a piddly little private. You don't know, how to get a hold of these people. So, I lost touch with him for about 25 years, but I've talked to him a few times.
So you were able to
reconnect, and it felt really good. And when we did, we talked for about 2 or 3 hours on the telephone, like we just talked to each other yesterday. We just picked up. It was really neat.
Well, good. What did you think of your officers?
I got to admit, I had really good officers. They were, because of the battalion that I was in, it was a flight battalion. We had a lot of captain pilots. We had a lot of lieutenant pilots. So our company commander was, he was a major. He was from Tennessee. There again, he was one of those real short guys like me. But you knew he meant business. And you know, I think he was a good officer. My platoon leaders, they were all pretty good. I never had any problems with any of them. I just don't have a hard time with people.
Right.
You know, I make friends pretty quick.
Right.
Even with officers.
What was your job in the military? You touched on it just a little bit, but kind of explain what you did.
Well, I was what was known as a 35 Romeo, which is an avionic radar equipment repairman. So basically I was a spark chaser. They would take the radar units out of the airplane, and they would, you know, I'd go check a radar piece of radar equipment out of the stock room, and then and fix it, and so it could go back to the aircraft. I worked on weather radar, transponders. That's the piece of equipment in the aircraft that talks to the other radar equipment on the ground, gives altitude, lets the ground know what the altitude is, how fast you're going, and whether you're, it has an IFF mode in it, which is identify friend or foe. And worked on altimeter radar, which was a pretty interesting piece of equipment to work with because it had little, when that piece of radar equipment is transmitting, it transmits for 15 billionths of a second. And you have to set that time just perfect on that piece of equipment, or else it doesn't work right. And I worked on SAM missile detectors. That was the one piece of equipment that we had to have a security clearance for because of the frequencies that were used and everything. And you did have to have a security clearance, and mine was a secret clearance. In fact, when I was in Korea working on that piece of equipment, we were actually out separately in a trailer, like for a tractor trailer truck, only it was about half as long. I think it was only about 20 feet long. And all of our radar equipment was inside of that, all the test equipment and everything, and nobody else in the platoon was allowed in there. You had to have a security clearance before you could get in there, and most of the guys didn't have it.
Okay. What was your most memorable experience?
Woo! I got a lot of them.
That you can tell.
In basic training, there was one that was really interesting. If anybody's ever been to Fort Jackson, South Carolina on Tank Hill, you know that Tank Hill, there is a hill there, and the barracks, you have barracks here, and then up the hill a little bit further you have another set of barracks, or there's another company, and it just keeps going on up the hill. The company down below us evidently had failed wall locker inspection one day. Well, the first sergeant said, "Boys, I'm not going to go upstairs and inspect your wall lockers anymore. You're going to have to bring them down here in the street, set them up for me to inspect them." And they're all standing out there in formation. Now you got to understand, there's 200 men standing there in formation. And he tells them, you have 60 seconds to get your wall lockers down here. Now these are they're pre-World War II barracks to begin with. So there's an upstairs and a downstairs, and the downstairs is still about 5 or 6 feet off the ground. Well, these guys make a mad dash into the barracks, 4 barracks. They make that mad dash in there, and you never heard such clanging in all your life. They get down there, they've got their wall lockers, they've got their foot lockers in the street and standing at attention beside them. And he said, oh, 10 seconds too late. Take them all back up. He made them take all of their wall lockers, all of their foot lockers back up into those barracks and be back here in 60 seconds. So they got back down there. They're all standing there. 200 men are now, their tongues are hanging out to here. And he says, now, see if you can get it done this time, right this time. And he looks at his watch, he says, go. The most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. These guys went up into those barracks, and I was kind of timing it too. And these guys that were in my company, they're laughing their butts off, and I'm saying, you don't want to laugh at that? A drill sergeant come along and say, you think that's funny? Let's see how funny that is. And be making us do it, and they go, you know, like that, and say, oh, we don't want to do that. So these guys, 200 men, 100 wall lockers and 200 foot lockers on the ground in the street in 60 seconds. They made it. And they did do it in 60 seconds. I'm there going, whoa, I am glad I am not in that company. So, you know, that things like that kind of stick in your brain a little bit too. Mm-hmm. Other than that, you know, there's a lot of things that kind of stick in my brain. The memorable events. Ginger's known me for quite a while and knows that I'll speak my mind a little bit. And when I was in Korea, there was, our chow was bad. Lord, it was bad. The lettuce would have slime around the edges of the leaves. All the food that we got was, you know, it just seemed substandard. And I kind of didn't give it a second thought because, hey, you know, we're overseas, they're shipping that overseas, and, you know, you just figured that's what you're going to have to live with. So, you know, we'd snitch a couple of raw eggs from the mess hall and buy ramen downtown, and we'd eat that, you know, to stay alive. And then I got put on night shift while I was over there. Well, you know, according to the Army regulations, if you work at night, you still have to be fed. So we used the MP's mess hall. And there was a group of us, I think there was about 13 men. We went over to the mess hall over there. This was our first night eating there. And we get our trays filled and we go eat supper and everything, and a bunch of us went back for seconds. And the cook said, what? Well, we'd like some more. I said, nobody's ever come back asking for more. And said, well, this is the first good food we've had since we've been in Korea. And they said, what? I said, yeah. So he loaded us back up, and we did eat good that night. I do have to admit that. And the next week we had an avionics platoon meeting, and you know, you go over a whole bunch of stuff, you know, what's coming down and blah, 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 you know, typical Army stuff, and any questions. So me being bashful like I am, I raised my hand and I said, how come is it that the MPs can have good food in their mess hall and we can't? I said, what? And the rest of the guys started speaking up and said, yeah, man, their food's great. So, well, let me check into that. So they checked into it, and next thing you know, they found out, well, we didn't know at the time, but our mess sergeant was also, he was in charge of all the food on Camp Humphreys. He's the one that divvied it up amongst all of the mess halls. And what he was doing, that you always got shipped more food than what you needed because there's going to be spoilage, so you kind of take that out to the side. He was taking the spoilage out to the side and using it in the mess hall that he was in charge of, which happened to be our mess hall. He was taking the good rations and selling it on the black market. And he'd gotten away from it, gotten away with it, had the avionics night crew not gone to eat another mess hall. Mm-hmm. Well, next thing we know, he was on his way to Fort Leavenworth. They nailed him big time.
As they should.
As they should.
While you were in Korea, did your unit ever come under attack, or were there any close calls? Or?
Well, I guess not really, but we did go under red alert while I was over there. I happened to be, I went over there, I think it was 2 years after the tree cutting incident up on the DMZ. And while I was over there, they found the tunnels under the DMZ that came out on the south side. And we did go on red alert. We did draw weapons. Mm-hmm. And it was very apparent that this was serious business.
Right.
I didn't tell my wife.
What weapons were you assigned to?
Just pea shooter, no, M16s. I mean, that was pretty much all we had.
Mm-hmm. What was everyday life like? Like, you get up in the morning, you just go to work. It was just kind of business as usual.
At Fort Campbell, it was up every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. You went to the base. You had your, you did calisthenics and a 2.5 mile run, and then all the people that lived on post, they were able to go take a shower and eat breakfast and everything. Guys lived off post, they could do whatever they wanted to, and then we went to work at, well, what time was it? Early. I remember it was early in the morning. Mm-hmm. And you know, we'd work all day. I guess I had it better than most did. Since I was in avionics and fixed electronic equipment, we had to be in air conditioning. There was no way around that. Of course, you had all of the stuff that any private or Spec 4 can expect. You're going to pull extra duties, you know, police call and all this and that. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have those jobs, which is one of the reasons I went on night shift, because you didn't get any of that stuff.
So you were actually in a hard billet the whole time? You didn't have to sleep out in tents, or, you know?
Well, you know, we still had to go to the field.
Okay.
We still had to go to the field, and yeah, we slept in tents because our mission, you know, we weren't like artillery units that go out and play war. Our mission wouldn't have been any different than if we were actually in war. We were repairing radios and repairing helicopters. I mean, it's no different whether we're doing it there at Fort Campbell or we were out somewhere else doing it. So, and it was really a pain in the rear to move all that equipment to the field. We were supposed to go to the field 4 times a year, but they figured out a way around that, and what you did was you went at the last of the first quarter and the first of the second quarter and just did, how many days was that? A couple of weeks. I know it was at least a couple of weeks you went out to the field and you lived out in the field, and how they do it in Kentucky, I don't know. When we went out to the field, it was 90 degrees. Well, first of all, there was frost on the ground that morning. I was in a field jacket and everything else. We flew out, cleared the area, so I was not able to shed all my clothing or the jacket.
Right.
Well, sometime during the day it went up to about 90 degrees. Yeah, not a good change, and you're still in that and you're sweating like crazy and getting pretty stinky too, I guess.
But so was everybody else.
Yeah, so was everybody else, and you know, I didn't get to hit the rack that night until probably about 1:30 in the morning. But anyway, you know, you had to set everything up, and that particular going to the field was 9 days, and it went from spring to summer to spring to fall to winter, because it had actually snowed on us one time too.
Oh my goodness.
In that 9-day period, we saw temperatures down in the 20s and up in the 90s. I don't know how they do that.
Hard to deal with. How did you keep in touch with people back home, and if you did, how did you do that?
Woo! You know, back then it was writing letters. You know, it was writing letters. When I was in Korea, to make a telephone call, number one, there's 17 hours difference between here and, so it was late at night when I called my wife up when she was going to work, before she went to work, and long distance telephone calls from Korea were very, very expensive.
Oh, I'm sure they were.
Very expensive. I remember one time I made a call and it cost me half my paycheck.
Oh my goodness.
For the month.
Okay, so how did you handle being away from home and family? How'd you occupy your time, or?
Boy, I drank a lot. No, I didn't do that. I took up photography back when they had film. And, you know, there's a lot of Korea that's actually, you know, pretty beautiful. And I still have about 400, I think about 400 slides of Korea. That was one of the main things. I bought a bicycle when I was over there and kind of rode around the countryside and stuff like that. I did put 2,000 miles on my bike while I was over there. I had one of those little odometers on it. Wore out one set of tires. I had to buy a new set of tires on it, so you know you've done some riding then.
Right.
But you know, you do get lonely, even though you have all kinds of people around you and you got lots of friends. I probably shouldn't have gotten married before I went in the service. Maybe that made it easier, but who knows?
Oh well. What did you do for fun or during your leave time?
Oh, what did we do for fun? Played practical jokes when we were in Korea. You know, I remember this one time. We were in the barracks, and we were kind of doubled up in the barracks because the floor that we were living on, they decided they're going to refurbish it and everything, so they moved us up to another floor, and we all had to double up in the barracks. So we had, I forget, we were supposed to be in 4-man rooms. I think we had 8 or 9 people in this room, which was okay because we were all, you know, best friends and everything. Well, one day we were fooling around. Actually, a guy by the name of Doug Allen, he was doing more of the tomfoolery. he took some foot powder and took and squirted it at one of the guys, you know, and it gets foot powder all over him and everything like that. And game was on. The game was on. Everybody had fans. Everybody had fans, and everybody had Johnson's baby powder. You had to have it. You dusted your bed down with it. You dusted your boots down with it because it was so hot and humid there. Well, I remember Darrell Dutton picking up the fan and shaking the powder behind the fan blades. Now this dispersed Johnson's baby powder real well, and it got all over the room. Well, the fight was on, and if you can imagine 7 or 8 or 9 guys there going with a fan, and it just blowing dust everywhere. Well, the next day, our houseboy, Mr. Lee, came, and I met him in the hallway. I said, "Mr. Lee," put my arm around him, said, we got a deal for you. He said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, the room's a little bit messy, and so, well, you take a look at it." His eyes got about that big, and he says, "Oh, I'm not going to clean that up." I said, "Oh, Mr. Lee, we're each going to give you $5 extra to help us clean the room, and we're going to help you." $5 a person? I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay." And we went in there, and we cleaned that room up. I mean, spick and span. Everything was polished up. The boots are all polished and everything. But I think it took us all day long to clean that room back up. So, you know, some of the stuff that you do for entertainment kind of gets out of hand.
Right. Did you receive any awards or decorations for your time in the military?
I did. I did. In basic training, I shot expert. When I went stationed at Fort Campbell, I was Soldier of the Month for 5th Transportation Battalion, which I think was quite an honor. Mm-hmm. And from there, he went on up to the 101st Airborne Division to compete for Soldier of the Month. And I think at the time I was a PFC at that time. And the Soldier of the Month board is just like an E5 board. You have command sergeant majors there, and they're interviewing you, which in and of itself can be quite nerve-wracking as a PFC. You have all those command sergeant majors sitting there. Well, evidently I did pretty good because the guy who beat me, he beat me by 1 point, and this was his 4th time up, and I think he was a spec 4. So my command sergeant major came out. I think he was a command sergeant major of another battalion, came out, and he put his arm around me and he said, "Son, you don't have anything to be ashamed of." He said, "He only beat you by 1 point, which means it only took me 1 more point to tie, and they'd have had to have a runoff." So I felt good about that. Before I ever got put up again, I'd gotten promoted to Spec 4, and then I came on overseas levy for Korea.
Did you save any of your mementos or uniforms of your time in service?
Well, because of several moves and everything, some of that stuff got kind of lost. I still have my Soldier of the Month award, but my last move to North Carolina, I haven't been able to locate it, so I don't know what happened to it.
Okay. When you came home, where did you live?
After the service? After the service, I lived in Decula, Georgia, which is used to be a real small town, about 40 miles northeast of Atlanta. When I graduated from high school, there was 53 in my class. Since then, the school has split and another high school's been built, and I think they have graduating classes now about 600, 800, 900 people.
Wow.
We only had 350 in our whole high school, and that was grades 8 through 12.
Mm-hmm.
So I came from a small area, so you can see why I like Taylorsville so well.
Right. And you said you got married before you were
Right.
in service. Did you
Right.
have any children born while you were in service?
No.
But you have children now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
2 girls,
Okay.
fully grown and out of the house.
Would you like that?
You'll like it too.
I'll take your word for it. And what was your occupation once you left the military?
There was a friend of mine, he called me up and asked me if I was doing anything. In fact, this guy had been in Vietnam. He was working for a construction specialty company, and he asked me, he said, if you're not doing anything, he says, I really need some help. And I went to work for them for a while, and the economy started going down, and in the construction industry, it started getting not so good.
Right.
And about 1980, well, I got out in 1980, about 1982, I think it was about 1982, my old, there was a master sergeant that I had worked with in the military. He retired shortly after I did,
Mm-hmm.
and he had moved to the Atlanta area also and went to work for Nixdorf Computer Corporation. And he was trying to, in fact, we went to the same church, and every week he'd say, Kris, when are you going to come down and interview? I said, John, I don't know anything about computers. He said, it doesn't matter. You know how to fix electronic equipment, and all you have to do is come down and interview for it. So one day I kind of overheard the bosses there talking about they were going to have to let somebody go. So I kind of knew who they were going to let go, and I felt sorry for the boy, so I figured he'd have a hard time finding another job. So I went in and I talked to the boss. I said, can I have tomorrow off? And they said, why? I said, I want to go interview for a job. They said, okay. You could tell it took a lot of relief off them because they were going to have to choose between myself or him. They'd already, I already heard them talking about that. So anyway, I went down and I interviewed for the job and got the job right then and there. I'd never seen a computer before.
Mm-hmm.
Till that day I went to interview for the job, and then next day I was repairing computers.
Very good. So what you learned in the Army and the job that you had in the Army actually helped you on the civilian side as well.
Right. Okay. Absolutely. Spark chaser is a spark chaser.
Right. Are you active, or do you belong to any of the veterans organizations in the county?
I would say you could say I'm a little active in some of the organizations. Presently, I'm commander of the Disabled American Veterans. I'm vice commander of the American Legion, and I'm a member of the Veterans. What do we call that?
VFW.
I remember the Veterans of Foreign War, and also a member of the Alexander County Veterans Committee. I would have to say that I may be one of the more active members.
Okay. And you said that a lot of your family members were in the military.
Yes,
you have
I
a lot
had
of ancestors.
Going way back, my great-great-grandfather, he was in the Civil War. World War I, everybody missed World War I because of being too old or too young.
Mm-hmm.
But in World War II, my grandfather and my father both were in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
and which was very stressful on my grandmother because she was kind of left behind. She's worried about her son being in Italy, her husband's in China, you know, and she doesn't know what either one of them are doing.
Right.
So, and I'd like to touch on something right there. So many times we talk about the veteran. The veteran always knows where he is, and he knows what he's doing. It's the wives and the mothers that are left behind that are, they're at a total loss of where anybody is. So there's always that worry factor.
Mm-hmm. They serve as well. Families serve as well.
They do. And my brother, he was in during the Vietnam era. He was in the Navy for 6 years and on submarines. Currently I have 3 nephews that are in the Army. One's getting out tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And right now that's, I think my family has probably served their fair share.
Yes, it sounds as though they have.
More than some families, I would say that.
Right. What would you say to the youth today interested in the military?
Woo, Ginger, I have mixed feelings about that, because I kind of wonder where the military is going now. You know, a few years back I would say, you know, it's a good opportunity, and it's, as any opportunity is what you make of it.
Right.
You learn discipline in the military, which is going to help you the rest of your life. I don't care where you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to help you. It builds up self-confidence. I do have to say that. But I wish I could just tell somebody to go out and join. And I told my nephews, I said, you know, yeah, I would do it because of what I got out and what I put into the military. You know, there's for anybody that's been in the military, and you know this, there's a camaraderie there that you can't explain to somebody that's never been there.
Right.
I mean, you just can't explain it.
Right. Do you have anything else that you would like to add or like to say?
Well, I figure I've gone on long enough.
Well, I'm giving you another chance.
I enjoyed my time in the military. I really did. You know, everybody goes through tough times when you're in it. I think probably the worst thing that for me is I was a young man. I'd only been married a year when I first went in, and I think the first 4 years that my wife and I were married, I spent 2 years with her.
Mm-hmm.
So those long departures are kind of the part that isn't a whole lot of fun. But being able to travel around the world and seeing how big this world really is. I mean, when you're in an airplane and you're going 600 miles an hour and it takes you 8.5 hours to go from Tokyo to San Francisco, and all you see below you is water, you get an idea of how big this country is. You got to understand that that is twice the distance across the United States from coast to coast. And you know, you get a better vision, like I said, on how big the world actually is. You get a better appreciation of geography and how other people live. You know, one interesting thing that happened to me when I was in Korea. I went to Seoul one day, and I was just walking around, and I went into some areas that I later found out that I wasn't supposed to go into those areas because it could be dangerous to my health. But you know, ignorance is bliss and you don't know any better. Everybody was friendly to me. I'd wave to people and they waved back to me. Koreans are very, very friendly people until you get them mad, and don't do that. But anyway, Seoul, Korea is kind of, there's flat areas, but there's also mountainous areas around there too. And I was looking down into a hooch area. It was kind of their courtyard down there, and there was kids playing. Now I know, as kids, whenever my generation went out and played Army, of course we were fighting the Japanese. So somebody'd always, you know, make Japanese sounds. Here were these Korean kids, and one of them down there was making distinctly English sounds, or American, you know. He wasn't speaking any words per se, but the sounds sounded like they could be American or English words. And I just busted out laughing. I said, you know, that never occurred to me. But kids are kids, no matter where you go in this world. They're kids. They play, they mock people, or whatever it is that you want to call it, but they do it. And that was just kind of a slap in the, you know, an eye-opener to me.
Right.
So in all, my military experience was good. I have no regrets.
Well, very good.
Except that I didn't retire from the military.
I hear that a lot. Well, I just want to thank you for sharing with us today, and thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you too.